Okay, we're going to continue with chapter 1. At home, Mrs. Stroh waited for Stephen to return. She had worried about him from the very beginning. He had been different from her other children in ways that were hard to describe. He had usually been a happy child, but had sometimes become frustrated and angry far beyond what was normal. Stretched out on the couch, she recalled a scene when Stephen was maybe 5 years old. Mr. Stroh had come home from work with rubber band-powered balsa airplanes for each of the children. They all had so much fun flying them, winding up the propellers, sending them aloft. They even launched them from the upstairs bedroom window to see how far they would fly. But when Stephen's plane had developed a crack in the wing, he went into a rage. Temper tantrums are a normal part of growing up, she knew, but that day was different. His older brother, Matthew, had shown him how to fix it with tape, but Stephen wouldn't have it. He wanted a new one. When that wasn't going to happen, he broke the plane into tiny bits of balsa wood. Even when it was just a pile of chips, he continued to break the chips into even smaller chips, and his rage went deep into that night. She remembered how the problems had become undeniable when he began school. By then, he had learned to control his temper. That wasn't the problem. His teachers had been frustrated that he never followed along with the class. He seemed to be in his own world, they'd said. Remembering back, she shook her head, thinking about how school had been such a struggle for him since his first day. But he had stuck it out through the years and somehow had scraped by just enough to be passed from one year to the next. It occurred to her that the only years he'd actually failed were first grade and then his senior year of high school, bookends of failure that had framed his school career. Anyway, he wouldn't have to go back there anymore, she thought to himself. He had gotten his diploma. For all those years, she had felt so helpless sending him off to school every morning when she knew he hated it. But he had graduated. Mrs. Stroh was sitting on the couch when Stephen pulled into the driveway. She had fallen asleep with the TV on and had woken up and seen that the Mike Douglas show was on. Time to change her dialysis fluid. She unbuttoned her sweater, lifted her undershirt, and opened the Velcro flap on the pocket that held the rolled-up plastic dialysis bag, with its coiled-up plastic tubing connected to a catheter in her belly. She took out the bag, carefully unrolled it, set it on a folded towel on the floor, and opened the valve. It was gravity feed. Cloudy, dark brown fluid drained from her peritoneum into the bag. Her kidneys had stopped working around the time Stephen had begun high school. They called it Bright's disease. She'd been on dialysis since then, and at this time was trying out a new type of dialysis, CAPD, which could be done at home. Stephen climbed the snow-covered steps of the back porch to the den and opened the door. "I got the job," he told his mother. "That's great. When will you start?" she asked, draping a blanket over the dialysis bag. He shut the door and noticed the cold. He took off his boots and left them on the rubber mat beside the door. "Geez, it's cold in here," he said. He went over and opened the wood stove and saw only pale orange embers glowing through ashes that still held the shrunken shape of the logs they had once been. He knocked the ashes off with the poker and put in 3 split logs. "Monday morning at 7, he told her. "That's good. That'll be very interesting, I think. Your father will be very proud of you." "I'm proud of you too," she said. "I'll make dinner tonight to celebrate," he said. First day of work at Rockmount Orchards. Monday morning, Stephen got up, got dressed, made a pot of coffee to fill his thermos, and made 2 sandwiches of leftover pinto beans. The beans had thickened in the refrigerator. He cut up a small onion, poured a few drops of olive oil onto the cast iron skillet, and fried the onion until it was a little bit clear. Then he spooned the beans onto the fried onions and mashed and fried until it was all dry enough so as not to make the bread soggy. He put mayonnaise and a little Tabasco sauce on the bread, and then spread the mashed bean paste on the bread. Stephen loved those sandwiches and had always looked forward to making them whenever his mother had made pinto beans for dinner. This time he'd made the pinto beans, and they turned out well. When he finished making the sandwiches, he fried an egg and made toast for his breakfast. Just as he was getting ready to leave, he heard his father getting up upstairs. But Stephen had to leave, or else he would be late. He didn't know what to expect on his first day on the job. He knew it was going to be all day outside in the cold, so he wore long johns, top and bottom, his thick wool ice fishing pants, wool shirt, a sweater, scarf, the hat and mittens his mother had knitted, and his red and black plaid hand-me-down wool coat. Inside the packing house, Ted Castro introduced him to the other men in the outdoor crew. The outdoor crew. Stephen liked the term. It felt like a team. The other outdoor crew members were Arthur Broccoli, George Malloway, Anton Castro, Bud, and Jesse. Ted Castro told Arthur Broccoli to show Stephen what he needed to know. Brock, as they called him, took one of a dozen pairs of wooden snowshoes with rawhide lacing off its nail on the wall and handed them to Stephen. "These are your snowshoes now. Write your name on them with this marker," Brock said. Then he walked to a back room and returned with a saw and a pruning pole. These tools were very interesting to Stephen. He saw the saw was made from a length of steel tubing bent into a lopsided C shape, with the blade forming what made the shape a lopsided D. The tension of the blade could be adjusted by turning a wing nut. The blades were lengths of bandsaw blade about 20 inches long, cut to fit the steel tubing. Okay, here's a picture of those tools. Drawing, so you can see there's the saw and there's the pruning pole. The pruning pole is about maybe 15 feet long or something like that, and there's the snowshoes. Okay, so Brock explained that the blades were a waste product of a nearby factory that used bandsaws and often broke blades. The orchard got them for free. The factory owners were happy not to have to pay the disposal fee. Stephen thought it was remarkable that the orchard had a symbiotic relationship with the nearby factory. He had recently learned that word and thought hard to find examples of symbiosis in the world around him. He remembered a line from a song on one of his brother Matthew's albums. "One man gathers what another man spills." Matthew had told Stephen that song is called St. Stephen by the Grateful Dead. "Maybe it's about you," he'd said. Stephen examined the pruning pole carefully. It was about 15 feet long, aluminum conduit pipe, about 1.5 inches in diameter, with a pair of pruning shears mounted at the top. A steel rod ran through the pipe to a lever with a handle at the base, which operated the pruning shears. The pruning pole, along with the saw, appeared to Stephen to be handmade, perhaps something they'd invented at the orchard. Brock taught Stephen how to use it. You hook the shear over the branch you want to cut and pull the lever, then lop it off. Easy as pie, demonstrating as he spoke. "Have you ever pruned apple trees before?" he asked. Stephen replied that he hadn't. "I'll show you about that out in real life. Write your name on those things too. Let's get going," so Brock said. They all went out to the van, got in, and Brock drove off to the block called the Bullard, where they would be pruning for the next few weeks. They arrived at the Bullard, got out of the van, and assembled their gear. Each man had his own thermos. Before they started pruning, they all stood in their snowshoes, drinking coffee, talking. 4 or 5 inches of snow had fallen in the night, on top of the 2 feet or so that had been there before, and there was no wind. The effect was an unnatural silence, as if the soft snow absorbed their voices, allowing no echo. Brock shouted, "Ah, what a beautiful morning!" There was no echo at all. George Malloway also shouted, "Ha!" testing the strange acoustics. Now, their cups emptied, the crew trudged off to their rows. Brock showed Stephen to his row and demonstrated to Stephen the art of pruning apple trees. He explained that the fruit spurs occurred on 2-year-old wood, to make sure to leave enough to make for next year's crop. Stephen had never heard fruit spur before. Okay, now here's a picture that goes with this. This is the first morning. They're all drinking their coffee and talking before they start pruning. And Stephen would be the one with the red and black plaid coat. Okay. Try to favor branches that radiate out slightly upward from the trunk of the tree, and try to leave 3 layers like discs around the central leader, Brock said. He pruned a large branch, moving along from the tips, clearing his way inward to the trunk, explaining why he'd cut what he'd cut and why he'd left what he'd left. He pointed out the many straight, thin, whippy branches that grew upward from the main branch. These are suckers. We cut these off. We want to keep the space between the layers clear. That allows for spray penetration and airflow. Brock said it was important to prune off a substantial amount of wood from the tree. He said that if too little wood were removed, the tree would make apples only every other year. This style we're doing is called central leader pyramid, he said. How many ways are there to prune apple trees? Stephen asked. Oh, there are tons of ways. Goblet, espalier, and some people even have their own style. We do this way because it works best for standard sized trees, and it's easy to teach. Other ways are better for dwarf or semi-dwarf trees. Do you know what I mean by standard, dwarf, and semi-dwarf? Brock asked. Something like large, medium, and small, Stephen said. Well, yes. The size of the tree is determined by the rootstock. These trees are standard. That's large. That's from a seedling rootstock. That's how it was done in the olden days. Farmers would plant apple seeds for rootstocks and then graft whatever variety of tree they wanted onto that. The rootstock has no influence on the type of fruit, only the size of the tree. I see. I didn't know that, said Stephen. Yes, it's pretty interesting. You know, apples are not self-pollinating, right? Brock asked. Yes, I did know that, Stephen said. Do you know why? Asked Brock. No. It's because all the trees of a given variety are clones. They all go back to a single tree. These are Macs. You know the story of that? No, Stephen said. Well, around 200 years ago, a guy named John McIntosh found some wild apple trees on his land in Canada, probably just from apple cores somebody threw out. One of the trees made good apples, so he started seedlings and grafted scions of his good tree onto the seedlings. Pretty soon they became popular, and he sold the grafted trees. People made more grafts from their grafted trees, and now they are maybe the most common apple in all of New England. Isn't that interesting? Said Brock. Yes, that's very interesting, said Stephen. Right. Wild apple trees grown from seed can pollinate each other, but they don't accept their own pollen. Each tree of any particular variety is actually a clone, genetically the same tree. That's why every fifth tree here, in every other row, is a crabapple tree. Crab apples can pollinate any variety. Actually, crab apples are just ungrafted trees grown from seed. That's why each one is different. Brock left Stephen to try a few trees on his own. By February, Stephen could distinguish between trees pruned by each different crew member. Even with the same method, each pruner had his own style. Brock said Stephen's work was getting good. Stephen recognized that what he'd learned from Brock was rare knowledge. From the story of the Macintosh apple, Stephen extrapolated that all of the many varieties of apple grown commercially would have their own story. He felt that he might be able to learn some of the things he had been unable to learn at school at this job. A seed of confidence had germinated in him, and with it came happiness. The outdoor crew often saw white-tailed deer, rabbits, and porcupines, and many birds. Most of the blocks were on hillsides to avoid frost pockets. So they also had great views of the Sahican River Valley, and the steeples of the church and town hall of New Dartford in the distance. Stephen liked working outdoors, even if it was cold, and sometimes it was very cold. George Malloway's nose was the work barometer for the outdoor crew, as to whether or not to stay out pruning or go to the basement of the packing house to repair bins and boxes. George's nose had been frostbitten years before, and so was more susceptible to frostbite than noses that have never known frostbite. One day in January, the temperature was 19 below zero Fahrenheit at the packing house in the morning. Ted Castro told the crew that if they wanted to fix boxes in the basement, they were welcome to. Nobody in the crew wanted to do that. Stephen wanted to do whatever the crew decided. The most important thing to him was to be a good team member. So the crew went out to the Bullard. That morning they drank their coffee in the van, then went outside to prune. It wasn't 20 minutes before Brock climbed out of his tree, put his snowshoes back on, and walked down to George. "Let me see your nose," he said. George looked at Brock, and Brock shouted to the scattered crew to go back to the van. Down at the van, Brock showed everybody George's nose. There was a clear line between the frozen part, which was white, and the part not yet frozen, which was regular suntan color. "This is what frostbite looks like," Brock said, "and here's how you treat it." Anton got in and started the van. Brock poured hot coffee from his thermos onto a hand towel and gave it to George to hold over his frozen nose. George winced from the shock of the hot coffee towel. Brock explained that the important thing was to avoid repeated thawing and freezing of the tissue. Since the van was running with the heat on, this was best. But he said that if they were not near a warm place, George should cover his face with a dry towel. Snow blindness was also a danger, so all the crew wore sunglasses. As the winter wore on, they all came to have reverse raccoon faces. The parts covered by the sunglasses were pale in comparison to the bronzed noses and cheeks. Stephen knew it looked peculiar, but regarded it as a badge of honor. He wondered if people who saw him might wonder about what kind of life he lived, that he had such a face. Okay, I'm going to take a break here, so this is a good place to do that.